Welcome to Second Order. This is a quiet channel with slow, calm explanations of familiar things. There's nothing you need to do. You can simply listen, or let the narration fade gently into the background while you rest. Tonight we'll spend some time thinking about something most people encounter many times every day, yet rarely stop to consider for long. The door. Almost every building we enter contains several of them. Homes have them. Offices have them. Schools, hospitals, libraries, and small neighborhood stores all depend on them. A door is one of those objects that quietly organizes the way people move through space. It separates one area from another. It can create privacy, or security, or simply mark the boundary between inside and outside. But despite how common doors are, their form and design did not appear all at once. Like many everyday objects, doors slowly changed over time, adapting to different materials, climates, building techniques, and social habits. And when we slow down enough to notice the details, the simple door begins to reveal a long story of practical problem solving. Tonight we'll explore that story slowly. Not as a dramatic timeline, but as a gentle observation of how people gradually learn to close openings in walls, protect spaces, and move comfortably from one place to another. To begin, it helps to picture the most basic purpose of a door. At its simplest, a door is just a movable barrier placed inside an opening. The opening itself is older than the door. Early shelters had entrances long before they had doors. In very early human dwellings, simple huts, caves, or temporary shelters, there was often only an open entryway. These openings allowed people to move in and out easily, but they also allowed wind, animals, dust, and cold air to enter. It is worth pausing on that for a moment. An open entrance is not a problem that announces itself loudly. It is more of a slow, constant discomfort. A draft that lingers. A sound that drifts in from outside. The presence of something unwelcome that was never quite invited. People living in those early shelters would have felt that discomfort every day. And the desire to reduce it, even slightly, would have been a natural and practical one. At some point, people began experimenting with ways to partially close these openings. The earliest solutions were not doors in the modern sense. Instead, they might have been heavy animal hides hung across an entrance. Or woven mats made from reeds. Or thick pieces of cloth. These coverings could be moved aside when someone entered, and dropped back into place afterward. They were simple, flexible, and easy to create using materials already available in the environment. There is something quietly clever about this approach. The materials were not specially made for the task. They were repurposed. A hide that had already served one function was given a second one. The same weaving skill used to make baskets or clothing was applied to creating an entrance covering. This kind of practical adaptation appears often in the early history of everyday objects. People worked with what they had. And what they had was usually enough to make a modest improvement. But they were also imperfect. Wind could lift them. Animals could push through them. And they did little to secure the space behind them. Over time, people began experimenting with something more solid. Wood became an obvious candidate. Wood was strong, widely available in many regions, and relatively easy to shape using basic tools. So instead of hanging a flexible covering across the entrance, builders began placing wooden planks across the opening. These early wooden barriers were often thick and heavy. They might be formed by fastening several vertical boards together using wooden crosspieces. The result was a solid slab that could block wind and intruders more effectively than cloth or hides. But there was still an important question to solve. How should this wooden barrier move? If it was simply leaned against the opening, someone would have to lift it aside each time they entered. That could be difficult, especially if the wood was thick. And there is a certain logic to the problem that becomes more apparent the longer you sit with it. A door that is hard to move is only slightly better than no door at all. The effort of moving it becomes a small obstacle repeated many times a day. Whoever carried the heaviest loads, or returned home in the dark, or needed to pass quickly in an emergency, would feel that obstacle most clearly. So the challenge was not just to close an opening. It was to close it in a way that remained easy to open. Gradually, builders experimented with ways to allow the barrier to swing. One of the earliest solutions involved wooden pivots. A small rounded peg at the top and bottom of the wooden panel could fit into matching holes in the floor and the lintel above the opening. When the panel was pushed, it would rotate on these pivots. This design allowed the door to swing inward or outward with much less effort. In some archaeological sites, early pivot doors have been discovered that date back thousands of years. Ancient builders in regions such as Mesopotamia and Egypt used pivot systems to create large wooden doors for temples and storage rooms. These doors could be surprisingly large and heavy, yet the pivot mechanism allowed them to move smoothly. It is interesting to consider how that discovery must have felt to the builders who first used it. A panel that had required considerable effort to move could suddenly be opened with a single push. The work of entry became lighter. The door became friendlier. Small improvements of this kind are easy to overlook from a distance. But at the moment they are introduced, they change something real about how people experience a familiar task. In many ways, the pivot door represents the earliest recognizable form of the modern door. It established several principles that continue to appear in door design today. A frame around the opening. A solid panel that moves. And a mechanism that allows that panel to rotate. As building techniques improved, doors became more refined. Instead of a rough slab of boards fastened together, some doors began to incorporate more deliberate structure. Builders learned that wood naturally expands and contracts with changes in humidity and temperature. Large flat wooden panels could warp or crack over time. To address this, they developed frame doors. These doors used a rectangular outer frame made from strong wooden pieces joined at the corners. Inside that frame, thinner panels could be inserted. The frame provided strength, while the panels allowed the door to remain lighter and more stable. This solution is a good example of how practical problems often lead to designs that turn out to have other advantages the builders may not have anticipated. A frame door was stronger. But it was also lighter. And the panels within the frame could be shaped and finished independently from the surrounding structure. That separation of components opened up new possibilities. This design had another advantage. Panels could be decorated. Carved patterns, geometric shapes, or simple raised surfaces could be added to the wood. These details served no mechanical purpose, but they gradually became part of architectural expression. Doors were no longer just barriers. They were also visual features of buildings. This shift from purely functional to partly expressive is worth noticing. It did not happen all at once. It was not a decision made by any single person. It emerged slowly, as craftspeople with skill in working wood found that the flat panels in front of them offered space for something more than plain timber. A small carved border. A raised shape at the center. A pattern repeated across the surface. None of these additions made the door work better. But they made it feel like something. They gave the entrance a character it had not previously possessed. In many historic towns and cities, the entrance door became a focal point of the home. Craftspeople developed techniques for carving, shaping, and assembling doors with remarkable precision. Different regions favored different styles. Some doors used vertical planks. Others used panels arranged in symmetrical patterns. Still others combined wood with metal reinforcements or decorative hinges. When you walk through an older neighborhood today and look at the doors along the street, you can often see traces of this regional variety. Some doors are simple and plain. Others are deeply carved or painted in specific colors. Each one reflects a choice made by someone, at some point, about how an entrance should look. Those choices accumulate over time into a kind of visual language. A shared understanding of what a door in this place, in this era, was supposed to communicate. Hinges themselves represent another important stage in the evolution of doors. Early pivot doors worked well for large structures, but they required careful alignment and strong framing. As metalworking improved, builders began attaching doors using hinges mounted on the side of the frame. A hinge allowed the door to swing smoothly while being securely fastened to the structure. Metal hinges were stronger and more reliable than wooden pivots in many situations. They could also support heavier doors without excessive wear. There is a particular elegance to the hinge that is easy to miss when you look at it quickly. It is a device that allows motion while maintaining connection. The door can move through a wide arc, yet it never loses contact with the frame. It swings freely, but it remains held. That combination of freedom and constraint is harder to achieve than it might appear. Earlier solutions either fixed the door in place or allowed it to move but required it to be lifted entirely free. The hinge found a middle path. Over time, hinge design became more standardized. Most modern doors use variations of the same hinge concept that developed centuries ago. When we open a door today and see the small cylindrical hinge pins along the side, we are looking at the result of a very long sequence of small mechanical improvements. Each generation of metalworkers adjusted something. Made the pin slightly smoother. Shaped the leaves to fit more cleanly into the door edge. Reduced the gap between the door and the frame when the door was closed. None of these refinements were visible from a distance. But together they produced a mechanism so dependable that we no longer think about it at all. Locks and latches followed a similar path of gradual refinement. Early doors could be held closed using simple wooden bars placed across the inside. A horizontal beam might slide into brackets on either side of the door frame. From inside the building, this beam prevented the door from being pushed open. But from outside, it could not be operated easily. This limitation was one that people would have noticed quickly. A door that can only be secured from inside is useful for sleeping or for keeping a space undisturbed. but it requires someone to be present when it is locked. And it cannot be locked at all when the building is empty. The desire to secure a space from the outside, to leave and return later with the confidence that nothing had been disturbed, was a natural extension of the same basic impulse that produced the door in the first place. Eventually, builders began developing mechanisms that allowed a door to be secured from either side. Ancient wooden locks used sliding pins and keys carved from wood. These locks were surprisingly sophisticated. A carved wooden key could lift pins inside the mechanism, allowing a bolt to slide open. Many of these early lock designs laid the groundwork for later metal lock systems. What is remarkable about these early wooden locks is not just that they worked, but that they worked using only the materials and tools available at the time. There was no precision machining. No standardized parts. Each lock was made by hand, shaped to fit its particular door. And yet the underlying principle, a key that aligns a set of internal components to allow a bolt to move, is essentially the same principle used in many locks today. The materials changed. The scale changed. The precision improved dramatically. But the core idea remained. As cities grew and houses became more complex, doors began to appear not only at the entrances of buildings but also inside them. Interior doors served a slightly different purpose. They separated rooms rather than protecting the entire structure. Because they did not need to resist weather or intruders as strongly, interior doors could be lighter and thinner. This allowed for more experimentation with materials and shapes. Some interior doors used decorative panels. Others used glass inserts to allow light to pass between rooms. In warmer climates, doors might include slatted openings to allow air circulation. Each variation reflected a different balance between privacy, airflow, and visibility. The interior door also introduced a quieter kind of function to the home. It was not about protection in the way that an exterior door was. It was about the management of attention. A closed bedroom door in a household full of activity is a kind of signal. It does not say that entry is forbidden. It says that the space behind it is currently occupied with something that asks not to be interrupted. It is a soft boundary rather than a hard one. Children understand this distinction very early. A closed door invites a knock before entering. An open door invites passing through. The door communicates something about the space it guards, even before anyone says a word. Meanwhile, in large public buildings such as libraries, government offices, and schools, doors were designed with durability in mind. Heavy traffic required doors that could withstand frequent use. Metal plates were sometimes added near the bottom where shoes and carts might strike the surface. In many older buildings, these metal plates are still visible today. They serve as quiet reminders of how many people have passed through those doors over the years. There is something appealing about this kind of accumulated evidence. The metal plate does not record anything specific. It does not tell you who passed through or when. But it tells you that many people did. And that the builders anticipated this, and made provision for it. A small act of foresight, carried forward through decades. The shape and placement of doors also influenced how spaces felt to those who moved through them. A narrow doorway creates a different experience than a wide double door. A heavy wooden door gives a different impression than a light glass one. Architects often think carefully about how a door introduces someone to a space. When a person approaches a building, the door becomes the point of transition between outside and inside. Even though we often move through doors without thinking about them, their design subtly shapes our experience. The height of the frame, the weight of the handle, the sound of the hinges, all of these details contribute to how we perceive the space beyond. A tall, heavy door at the entrance of a building communicates something different from a low, narrow one. The tall door suggests that what lies beyond is large, or important, or worth the effort of entering deliberately. The low door suggests something more intimate, something that requires you to slow down just slightly as you pass through. Some of these associations are cultural. Others seem to emerge more directly from the physical experience of moving through the space. A door that requires effort to open changes the quality of arrival. The transition from outside to inside feels earned in a small way. Architects working on libraries, courthouses, and places of worship have long understood this. The approach to the door, the weight of the handle, the moment of passage, all of these are part of the experience the building is designed to create. Even in more ordinary buildings, these effects are present, even if no one has thought about them explicitly. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of doors is how ordinary they remain despite their long history. A person might pass through dozens of doors in a single day without remembering any particular one. They open easily. They close quietly. They perform their task and then fade back into the background. And yet behind this simplicity lies a slow accumulation of design decisions made by countless builders and craftsmen over many centuries. Each improvement, whether a hinge, a panel frame, or a latch, made the door slightly more practical, slightly more reliable. By the time we reach the present day, the modern door appears almost inevitable. But in reality, it is the result of many small experiments repeated across generations. In the next part, we'll continue exploring how different types of buildings influenced door design, how materials such as metal and glass began to appear more frequently, and how the everyday door gradually became one of the most standardized elements in modern architecture. For now, it's enough to notice that something as simple as opening a door connects us quietly to a long history of practical invention. And most of the time, we never even realize it. As buildings slowly became more complex, the role of doors expanded beyond simply closing an entrance. In many early homes, a single doorway was enough. A small dwelling might have only one main room where most activities took place. Cooking, sleeping, working, and storing supplies all happened in the same shared space. But as architecture evolved, houses began to include multiple rooms. Different spaces were used for different purposes. And once separate rooms existed, doors naturally followed. Interior doors began appearing inside homes, separating sleeping areas from common spaces, or storage rooms from kitchens. These doors did not need to be as thick or heavy as exterior doors. They were not protecting the house from wind or animals. Instead, they offered something quieter: separation. A closed door meant a different activity could take place on the other side. Someone could rest while others worked nearby. Someone could read or write while the rest of the household moved through the main rooms. This quiet function, creating private pockets inside larger spaces, became one of the most enduring roles of doors. Interior doors gradually developed their own style. Instead of thick planks designed for strength, many interior doors used lighter panels. Frames became thinner. Panels became more decorative. In some places, doors included small glass inserts that allowed daylight to pass from one room into another. These glass panels were often divided into sections by thin wooden strips, creating patterns that were both practical and visually pleasing. Even today, many homes still use variations of this panel and frame design. Although materials and manufacturing techniques have changed, the overall structure remains surprisingly similar. While houses were evolving in this way, other types of buildings were also experimenting with doors. Libraries, for example, needed doors that balanced openness with quiet. A library entrance might be wide enough to allow many people to enter throughout the day, yet heavy enough to close gently and keep outside noise from disturbing the reading rooms inside. In older libraries, it is common to see tall wooden doors with thick frames and long metal handles. These doors move slowly and deliberately when opened. Their weight encourages visitors to move with a certain calmness as they enter the building. There is an unspoken communication in that weight. The door does not display a sign asking for quiet. It simply asks for a certain kind of attention through the effort it requires. Visitors adjust without being told. In grocery stores and marketplaces, doors serve a different purpose. They manage a steady flow of movement. People enter with empty baskets and leave with full ones. The doors must open easily, close reliably, and endure hundreds or even thousands of uses each day. Over time, some stores adopted double doors that swing both inward and outward. This allowed customers to pass through without needing to stop and pull a handle. In more modern supermarkets, automatic sliding doors have become common. But even these automated doors are simply a continuation of the same basic principle, controlling movement between spaces. Warehouses provide yet another variation. Large storage buildings often require doors that are much bigger than those used in homes. These doors must allow carts, pallets, or vehicles to pass through. Instead of swinging on hinges, warehouse doors may slide sideways along metal tracks or roll upward like a curtain. The mechanism changes, but the purpose remains familiar. A controlled opening. A movable boundary. The door quietly regulates how goods and people move from one area to another. Hospitals also rely heavily on carefully designed doors. In a hospital corridor, doors must open easily for patients, visitors, and medical staff. Some doors include small windows so that people approaching from either side can see whether someone else is entering. Others are designed to remain open most of the time, closing automatically only in specific situations, such as during a fire emergency. These variations show how the door adapts to the needs of each environment. In quiet places like libraries, doors slow people down. In busy places like grocery stores, doors speed people up. In hospitals, doors help maintain safety and visibility. Across all these examples, the door remains a surprisingly flexible object. It changes shape, weight, and movement depending on the space it serves. What stays constant is the underlying purpose: to allow passage while maintaining the boundary. To connect two spaces without erasing the difference between them. That balance, between opening and closing, between access and separation, is something each building type resolves in its own way. And the door is the device that makes the resolution possible. Materials also continued to evolve. For many centuries, wood remained the primary material used for doors. It was widely available and easy to shape using tools. But as industrial manufacturing expanded, new materials began to appear. Metal doors became common in factories and public buildings where fire resistance was important. Steel doors offered strength and durability. They could resist impacts and withstand heavy daily use. The introduction of metal into door construction changed the nature of what was possible. A wooden door, however carefully built, has limits imposed by the nature of the material. Wood is affected by moisture. It can swell and stick in wet weather. It can contract and leave gaps in dry conditions. It is vulnerable to fire. Metal eliminated many of these limitations. A steel door, properly sealed and mounted, behaves consistently across a much wider range of conditions. It does not swell. It does not warp. It resists impact in ways that wood cannot. The trade-off is weight and thermal conductivity. A metal door can feel cold to the touch in winter. It transmits temperature in ways that wood does not. Builders learned to account for this, adding insulation and seals to improve performance. Glass doors appeared more frequently as well. Advances in glass production made it possible to create large transparent panels that were strong enough to function as doors. These glass doors changed the experience of entering buildings. Instead of stepping from a bright outdoor space into a darker interior, people could see inside before opening the door. This created a sense of openness and continuity between indoor and outdoor environments. Modern office buildings often use large glass entry doors for exactly this reason. They allow natural light to pass freely while still maintaining a controlled entrance. Glass also changed the relationship between inside and outside in a subtler way. A glass door does not just let people see in. It lets the people inside look out. The boundary between the two spaces becomes visible rather than opaque. You can see the street from the lobby. You can see the lobby from the street. That transparency is something earlier doors could not offer. And it altered the feel of spaces in ways that were not always anticipated. Another quiet development in door design was the gradual standardization of size. In earlier centuries, doors varied widely depending on the builder and the available materials. A doorway in one house might be taller or narrower than a doorway in another. But as construction methods became more standardized, door sizes began to follow consistent measurements. Builders found that having predictable dimensions made construction faster and more efficient. Manufacturers could produce doors in common sizes that fit most openings. This standardization helped reduce cost and simplify installation. Today, many interior doors in residential buildings follow similar height and width measurements. This consistency allows doors, hinges, and frames to be produced in large quantities with reliable compatibility. Standardization is one of those developments that tends to go unnoticed precisely because it succeeds. When door sizes vary unpredictably, every installation requires custom work. Hinges must be adjusted. Frames must be trimmed. The whole process takes longer and costs more. When sizes are consistent, the work becomes routine. A carpenter knows what to expect before arriving at a site. A manufacturer knows what dimensions to produce. The door fits the first time. This kind of invisible efficiency runs through much of modern construction. It is not exciting. It does not attract attention. But it allows buildings to be assembled more quickly and more reliably than would otherwise be possible. Yet despite all this standardization, doors still maintain a subtle variety. Handles can be round knobs, straight levers, or simple pulls. Some doors swing inward, others outward. Some slide quietly along tracks. Others fold into panels. Some remain open most of the day. Others stay closed until someone approaches. Even the sound of a door closing can vary. A heavy wooden door might produce a soft, solid thud. A hollow interior door may close with a lighter click. Automatic doors glide almost silently along hidden mechanisms. These sounds, small as they are, become part of the background rhythm of everyday life. We hear them without thinking about them. The quiet closing of a door behind someone. The gentle creak of hinges in an older building. The faint rush of air as a large entrance door opens briefly and then settles back into place. Over time, these small experiences become so familiar that we barely notice them at all. Doors fade into the background of our daily routines. We reach for the handle. Push or pull. Step through. And continue with whatever we were doing. Yet each door we encounter represents a long sequence of design decisions made by people who were simply trying to solve practical problems. How to keep warmth inside during winter. How to keep animals out. How to allow people to move comfortably from one space to another. How to protect valuable items stored inside a building. Each improvement added another small layer of refinement. Stronger hinges. Better locks. More stable frames. Smoother movement. None of these changes were dramatic on their own. But together they slowly shaped the familiar object we now take for granted. And this quiet evolution continues even today. Modern buildings still experiment with different types of doors. Some use motion sensors to open automatically. Others use lightweight composite materials that resist warping and moisture. Yet even with all these new technologies, the basic idea remains unchanged. A door is still a movable barrier placed inside an opening. It still marks the moment when one space becomes another. And in many ways, the door represents one of the simplest and most enduring pieces of architecture. It does not demand attention. It simply works. Opening when we approach. Closing when we leave. Standing quietly between spaces until someone passes through again. By the time doors had become a regular feature in homes, shops, and public buildings, people had also begun paying closer attention to the smaller components that made doors easier to use. One of the most familiar of these components is the door handle. Although we rarely think about it for long, the handle plays an important role in how the door functions. Without some form of grip or lever, opening a door would be awkward. A flat wooden surface provides little control when someone tries to pull or push it. Early doors were often opened simply by pushing on the surface of the wood. If a person needed to pull the door toward them, they might grab the edge of the door or use a small carved indentation. Over time, builders realized that attaching a separate object to the door made it much easier to operate. The earliest handles were often very simple. They might consist of a small wooden peg or knob attached to the surface of the door. This knob gave the hand something solid to grasp. In many early examples, the handle was not connected to the locking mechanism at all. It simply made the door easier to move. As locking systems became more common, handles gradually became integrated with the latch that held the door closed. Inside the door, a small horizontal bar called a latch would slide into a hole in the door frame. When someone turned the handle, the latch would retract, allowing the door to open. This mechanism may seem ordinary today, but it represented a significant step in door design. Instead of lifting a wooden bar or moving a bolt manually, a person could simply turn a handle and push the door open. This small convenience made doors easier to operate for everyone, including children and older adults. The integration of handle and latch is worth noticing as an example of how separate solutions can merge into a single, more elegant one. The handle and the latch each solved a different problem independently. One made the door easier to grip. The other made the door easier to secure. When they were combined, both functions became more convenient at the same time. Handles themselves appeared in many shapes. Some doors used round knobs. Others used straight levers. In certain buildings, particularly older ones, large metal rings were attached to the door as pull handles. These rings were especially common on heavy wooden doors in public buildings or town halls. A person would grasp the ring and pull the door toward them. Even today, similar pull rings can still be seen on historic buildings. Another important part of the door system is the hinge. We mentioned hinges briefly earlier, but their role deserves a closer look. A hinge allows the door to rotate around a fixed point. It connects the moving panel of the door to the stationary frame. Without hinges, the door would simply be a loose barrier that had to be moved entirely out of the way each time someone entered. The hinge solved this problem elegantly. Two metal plates, called leaves, are attached to the door and the frame. A small cylindrical pin runs through the center of these plates. This pin allows the plates to rotate smoothly around it. The door can then swing open and closed repeatedly without separating from the frame. Although the basic hinge design has remained consistent for centuries, many variations exist. Some hinges are small and nearly invisible once installed. Others are large and decorative, with intricate metal patterns. In historic buildings, hinges were sometimes forged by blacksmiths who shaped the metal by hand. These handcrafted hinges often included long metal straps that extended across the door surface. The straps added strength while also becoming part of the visual design. As manufacturing methods improved, hinges became more standardized and compact. Modern doors often use simple cylindrical hinges that are recessed into the edge of the door. Only the hinge barrel remains visible when the door is closed. Another element that gradually became common is the door closer. In busy buildings, doors are often designed to close automatically after someone passes through. This helps maintain privacy, temperature control, and security. A door closer is a small mechanical device mounted near the top of the door. It uses springs and hydraulic resistance to gently guide the door back into its closed position. Without a door closer, a door might remain open indefinitely or swing shut abruptly. The closer slows the motion, creating a controlled and quiet closing movement. Many people have experienced the soft resistance of a door closer without realizing exactly how it works. When you push open a heavy door in an office building or hotel, you may notice that the door gradually returns to its frame behind you. This motion is the result of a small system of springs and fluid pressure working together. Another feature that evolved alongside door handles and hinges is the lock. Locks are closely connected to the idea of privacy and protection. When doors first appeared, the main concern was often keeping animals or weather out. But as communities grew and buildings began storing valuable goods, people needed ways to secure their doors against unwanted entry. Early locks were made from wood. These wooden locks used a surprisingly clever system of pins and keys. Inside the door, a bolt would slide into a slot in the frame. Small wooden pins blocked the bolt from moving. A specially shaped wooden key could lift the pins to the correct height, allowing the bolt to slide open. This design required careful craftsmanship, but it worked reliably. Many of these wooden lock systems appeared in ancient civilizations and were used for centuries. Later, metal locks became more common. Metal offered greater durability and precision. Metal keys could be made smaller and more intricate. Lock mechanisms could include multiple pins arranged in complex patterns. Each improvement made the lock slightly more secure. Over time, locks became a familiar companion to doors. When someone approaches a door today, they expect to find a handle and, often, a locking mechanism nearby. These two elements work together to control access. The handle allows entry. The lock restricts it. In certain environments, doors also began incorporating windows. Small glass panes were placed within the door itself. These windows served several purposes. They allowed light to pass through the door, which could brighten hallways or entryways. They also allowed people to see whether someone was approaching from the other side. This feature became especially useful in schools, hospitals, and offices where many people move through the same corridors. A small window in the door can prevent accidental collisions when two people approach from opposite directions. In some buildings, doors were also designed with ventilation in mind. Louvered doors, for example, include angled slats that allow air to circulate even when the door is closed. These doors are often used in closets, utility rooms, or warm climates where airflow is important. The slats maintain privacy while allowing air to move freely. Once again, the door adapts quietly to the needs of the space. Another interesting variation is the sliding door. Instead of swinging on hinges, sliding doors move horizontally along a track. This design can be particularly useful in spaces where a swinging door might take up too much room. Traditional Japanese homes use sliding doors made from wood and paper panels. These doors, known as shoji screens, created flexible room divisions. They could be opened fully to combine rooms or closed to create separate spaces. Modern sliding doors often use glass panels mounted on metal tracks. These are common in homes that open onto patios or gardens. Sliding doors allow large openings without requiring the space needed for a swinging door. The concept remains the same, controlling an opening in a wall. But the method of movement changes to suit the layout of the building. Even large industrial doors follow similar principles. In factories or warehouses, massive doors may roll upward along vertical tracks. These roll-up doors allow trucks and machinery to pass through large openings. Despite their size, they operate using the same basic idea found in smaller doors. A movable barrier that opens and closes repeatedly. Across homes, offices, factories, and public buildings, doors quietly perform this role countless times each day. People rarely pause to consider the engineering behind them. But every hinge, latch, and handle reflects a long history of refinement. Each generation of builders solved small practical problems. How to make the door easier to open. How to make it close more smoothly. How to make it last longer. The result is the door we know today. A familiar object that rarely draws attention to itself. Yet behind its simplicity lies a remarkable accumulation of human experimentation. And as we continue moving through our daily lives, opening and closing doors without much thought, we participate in that long tradition of practical design. By now, it may be becoming easier to notice just how many different kinds of doors exist around us. Most of them perform the same basic task. They open. They close. They separate one space from another. And yet the experience of passing through each door can feel slightly different. In a quiet home, an interior door might be light and almost silent. It opens with a gentle push, swings smoothly on its hinges, and settles back into place with a soft click of the latch. In an older building, a wooden door may move a little more slowly. The hinges may produce a faint creaking sound that has been repeated thousands of times over many years. The wood may carry small marks or scratches left behind by the ordinary rhythm of daily life. In a modern office building, the door might be made of glass and aluminum. It may open easily with the pressure of a hand and then glide back toward the frame under the steady control of a door closer mounted above. The experience of these doors is slightly different, but the underlying idea remains the same. A movable boundary. A quiet transition. Something that stands between spaces until someone passes through. There is a kind of patience in a door that is easy to overlook. It does not change based on who is using it. It does not speed up when the day is busy, or slow down when the building is quiet. It simply responds to whoever reaches for it, in the same way it has always responded. That consistency is part of what makes doors so dependable. They have no mood. They do not wear out their welcome. They are simply ready, every time. Over time, many buildings have developed their own subtle patterns of door use. In a small apartment, doors may open and close throughout the day as people move between the kitchen, the bedroom, and the hallway. In a library, doors are often opened carefully and closed quietly so that the silence inside is preserved. In a grocery store, the entrance doors may open constantly as customers arrive, select their items, and leave again. Each setting produces its own quiet rhythm. The doors respond to that rhythm without asking for attention. They simply continue doing what they were designed to do. Opening when needed. Closing when the moment passes. Some doors are used so frequently that they seem almost permanent in their movement. The entrance to a busy cafe, for example, may open hundreds of times in a single day. Customers enter. Others leave. The door swings forward and back again. Yet the mechanism continues working reliably. The hinges carry the weight. The latch aligns with the frame. The handle remains ready for the next person who reaches for it. In contrast, other doors may remain closed for long periods of time. A storage room door in a quiet building might only be opened occasionally. A door to an attic or basement may stay closed for weeks or months. Yet even these rarely used doors serve an important purpose. They mark the presence of a space beyond them. They define the boundary between areas that are regularly used and those that remain quiet and undisturbed. Across homes, schools, offices, hospitals, warehouses, and countless other buildings, doors quietly perform this role every day. They do not require complex instructions. They do not need to be studied. Most people learn how to use a door as children without ever thinking about the mechanics involved. A hand reaches forward. The handle turns. The door moves. A simple action repeated thousands of times across a lifetime. And because the action is so familiar, the door itself often fades into the background of our awareness. We notice the room we enter. We notice the conversation inside. We notice the activity waiting on the other side. But the door, the object that made the transition possible, rarely demands attention. And yet the quiet reliability of the door is the result of many generations of careful experimentation. Builders learned which materials resisted warping. Metalworkers refined hinge designs so that doors could swing smoothly year after year. Craftspeople improved latch mechanisms so that doors could close securely with a gentle push. Manufacturers eventually standardized dimensions so that doors could be installed efficiently across millions of buildings. Each of these changes was small. None of them were dramatic on their own. But together they produced an object that is now so familiar that we barely notice it. Today, doors continue to evolve quietly. Automatic doors now open when motion sensors detect someone approaching. Magnetic locks secure certain doors in large office buildings. Electronic key systems allow access without traditional metal keys. Yet even with these modern additions, the door remains surprisingly close to its original purpose. A movable barrier. A way to control the opening in a wall. A moment of transition between one place and another. And perhaps that is why doors remain such a stable part of architecture. They solve a simple problem. They do it reliably. And once that problem is solved, there is very little reason to change the basic idea. A door does not need to be complicated. It only needs to open when someone approaches. And close again when the space behind it becomes quiet. If you think about it for a moment, most of us move through many doors every single day. The door of a bedroom when waking in the morning. The door of a building as we step outside. The door of a store or cafe during the day. The door of a home again in the evening. Each door marks a small transition in the flow of daily life. A shift from one activity to another. From one room to another. From outside to inside. Or from public spaces back into the privacy of home. Because of this, doors are closely tied to the quiet structure of everyday routines. They appear at the beginning and end of many ordinary moments. And yet they remain patient objects. They do not hurry anyone. They simply wait, standing in their frames until someone reaches for the handle again. Over centuries, builders and designers have refined the door into one of the most dependable elements of any building. It does not require electricity in its simplest form. It does not demand constant maintenance. It simply performs its function again and again. Opening, closing, separating, connecting. And so the next time you walk through a doorway, whether it is a heavy wooden door in an older building, a glass door at the entrance of a modern office, or a quiet interior door in a familiar home, you might briefly notice the small movement that takes place. The handle turning. The hinges guiding the panel outward. The space beyond becoming visible. A small moment of transition. A simple object doing exactly what it was designed to do. And then, almost immediately, the door fades once again into the background. Quietly waiting for the next person who passes through. One thing that becomes apparent when you spend time thinking about doors is how well they record the passage of time. Not in any deliberate way. Doors do not keep records. They do not log the names of the people who have passed through them. But they carry evidence of use in their surfaces. In their edges. In the slight smoothing of a wooden handle that has been gripped thousands of times. In the shallow indentation worn into a stone threshold by years of footsteps. These marks accumulate slowly, without anyone intending them. A door that has been in the same building for 50 years will look different from one that was installed last month. Not dramatically different, necessarily. But differently worn. The paint may have faded near the handle. The latch may have developed a particular sound when it closes. The hinges may have settled slightly, so that the door rests at a very faint angle. People who live or work in a building long enough begin to know their doors in this way. They know which ones stick in summer when the humidity rises. They know which ones creak in a particular spot on cold mornings. They know the exact amount of force needed to pull a heavy door fully closed. This kind of knowledge is entirely practical, and it is almost never spoken aloud. It accumulates quietly, the way most useful knowledge does. In older buildings, these accumulated qualities become part of the character of the place. A door that has been used for a century carries something with it that a newly installed one does not. Not a visible history, exactly. But a kind of physical record of use. There is something calming about this. The door has outlasted many of the activities that happened in its presence. It has been opened on ordinary mornings and on significant ones. It has been closed behind people who were leaving for the last time, and opened for people arriving for the first time. None of this is visible in the door itself. But knowing it is possible gives the door a kind of quiet depth that is easy to overlook in the course of a busy day. Doors also have a way of marking the rhythm of shared life. In a home with several people, the sounds of doors throughout the day form a kind of informal soundtrack. A door opening in the morning signals that someone has woken. A door closing in the evening signals that someone has settled in for the night. The particular sound of a specific door, its creak, its click, the slight resistance of its latch, becomes associated with the person who uses it most often. These associations form without any effort. They are simply the result of living alongside the same objects, in the same spaces, over a long period of time. Families who have lived in the same house for many years often find that even small changes to their doors, a new latch, a repainted surface, a hinge replaced, produce a brief disorientation. The familiar sound is gone. The door feels different under the hand. The small habits built around the old version of the door no longer quite apply. This is a very minor form of adjustment, of course. People adapt quickly. Within a few days the new door becomes familiar and the old one is forgotten. But the brief disorientation reveals something real. We form relationships with the objects around us, even the most ordinary ones. And those relationships are built through repetition and small sensory details rather than through any conscious attention. It is also worth noticing how differently doors are experienced depending on one's role in relation to them. A person who approaches a door from the outside is in one situation. They are about to enter. The door is a threshold. What lies beyond it may be familiar or unfamiliar. The act of opening it is an arrival. A person who watches a door from inside a room is in a different situation. The door is a boundary. Someone may come through it, or may not. It represents the possibility of contact with the world outside. And a person who closes a door behind them and steps away is in yet another situation. The closed door is a kind of conclusion. An activity has ended. The space has returned to stillness. Each of these experiences involves the same physical object. But the meaning of the door shifts depending on which side you are standing on, and what you are expecting. This variability is part of what makes the door such a rich subject for reflection, once you begin to pay attention to it. The door is never just a door. It is always also a relationship between a person and a space, mediated by a very simple mechanism. That's all for now. This has been Second Order. Take the rest of the night slowly.